So with Nope in theaters, I will eventually do a review on that, but I haven't really reviewed critically Jordan Peele's now trilogy of whatever you want to call it, auteur cinema. So here I'm going to look at Us. This will be mainly non-spoiler. I will only have a few minor spoilers towards the end. I will do a much more spoiler review down the road. So what is Us? Well, again, non-spoiler, the basic premise is a black family essentially confronts their doppelgangers. But in terms of the main thing for this story, which is mainly horror, although I do think it's kind of like a black comedy, no pun intended, it's about how Addie, as this young African American girl, has seemingly these mental, physical disabilities and issues and traumas, and those resurface when the family takes a vacation and they encounter the doppelgangers. There's a lot going on here, and I am recommending it. I do give it a very strong grade. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think this is far superior to Get Out. It probably will be even stronger than Nope, because from what I'm getting from research, Nope is doing something else, and I think this is the dilemma with Us because most of the movie, I think for about three-fourths of its running time, is actually pretty strong. Of course, like with any horror film, there's going to be plot holes and certain character moments don't make sense. But overall, the homages, the camera work, the twists, and so on and so forth, they mostly do make sense. The performances are mainly strong, although you have to be honest, it's really Lupita who's doing most of the movie, and I think she does it fairly well. The problem is the last fourth, where Jordan really unleashes a ton of extra twists and extra plot exposition, and that I think really kind of dooms the movie because then it becomes insanely silly and stupid. But for most of the film, it's actually very strong. It makes enough sense that you can believe the premise of how these doppelgangers operate, why they have this vendetta, why they want to terrorize people, and so on and so forth. And it is laid out mostly pretty well. And I actually think that if you're a really hardcore horror person, you're going to appreciate a lot. And I mean, there is a lot of illusions. I counted, just off the bat, Nightmare on Elm Street, Jaws. There's a lot of Brian De Palma. There's even some Hitchcock moments with Psycho. There's Chud. There's a lot of like Twilight Zone feeling and vibes to this as well. So there's a lot of loving care and attention to what we're looking at, the symbols, and the little touches of paying homage to these older films and television shows. And I appreciated that a lot. Now we get to the critical part. What is the dilemma? Well, the obvious problem here would be he gives a very short kind of brief explanation for why the doppelgangers are the way they are. It's basically a kind of government conspiracy, and a lot of horror films do lean on that, and that's no problem. I think some of the best horror films are in that vein, like They Live. It's basically a super conspiracy. So nothing wrong with leaning on conspiracy theory per se. I think where it gets a little weak is the obvious problems are like, wait, why don't they have more weapons available? Again, these doppelgangers are vulnerable to being hurt and feel pain, so you kind of wonder, like, again, this is America. People have guns all over the place, so this is a really weird community that seems to be very gun free for a lot of the movie. That felt very weird. The doppelgangers also have different attitudes and dispositions. Some of that is explained, but some of it is not explained. They just seem to have certain characteristics. We don't know why. They just seem to have certain leanings, and that makes them vulnerable to being counterattacked. And there were some moments which were really funny, but I understand what Jordan Peele is doing. He actually cites this biblical verse, Jeremiah 11:11, and it's very clever. It's all throughout the movie. It's mostly well done, but after a while, he uses it way too much. It's not even very original. This is sort of like an M. Night Shyamalan trick where it seems like we're looking at a horror movie, but really we're looking at a biblical allegory, and it's kind of oppressed are getting this religiously righteous revenge on the overclass and the capitalist oppressors and the rich white and now ironically really rich black people who have ignored them. I have no issue with the politics. It just seemed to be the obvious question would be, wait, how did these doppelgangers know this? I mean, are they into religion? Did they create a religion underground? What do the symbols mean in terms of biblical symbolism as well? They seem disconnected. I understand for the sake of the story, it provides an easy structure, but you ask obvious questions. Well, why don't they use a kind of Islamic jihad ideology? Why are they using a biblical ideology? It just seems very arbitrary. So that's where it gets a little weaker when you probe it at a deeper level. The mythical structure doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense. And probably the biggest problem is when we discover Addie's source for her trauma. It felt a little too convenient and just got wrapped up like nothing. And the twist is strong. You will be asking a lot of questions like, okay, what does that mean? Is that child in danger? Is the main character evil? I mean, it just brings up a lot of questions. And finally, there's this kind of consistent hatred of the Reagan administration in the 1980s and these right wingers. I have no issue, again, with the politics. I just don't think it was thematically that strong. He has this kind of vehement attack on Hands Across America. Now, I'm old enough. I remember this because I did grow up with the 80s, but with the late 80s when I was more of a teenager, I kind of remember Hands Across America. I just never thought of it as that villainous or stupid or evil, but for him, it's like symbolic of the most evil things in America. And I'm just like, okay, I kind of understand where you're going with it, but really, if you're too old or too young, you're going to miss out that critical time period. And you're going to be like, who cares? Like, why would Hands Across America be so symbolic of the most evil things in the universe? It felt very specific, which I did enjoy because I understood it. But if you're not in the right age group, you're going to be like, well, who cares? Why is that so important? So it's going to be hit or miss, I think, with a part of the audience, but I think most people will enjoy it at the visceral level. I was never scared with Us, but I did feel not frightened, but I thought it was very effectively done in terms of the horror genre, in terms of setting things up. And some people were complaining, well, doppelgangers seem a little bit too silly at times. They're not really threatening. I think that was intentional. You're not supposed to find them all the time frightening. You are supposed to find them pretty ridiculous and silly. I think, again, this is a satire on American society and really global society, how capitalism has kind of ruined people's brains and their morality, and they really can't differentiate between what is silly and serious. And I think Nope is picking up that thread. Now, whether it does it better, it's hard to say. So it's not one of the greatest horror films I've ever seen, but it is a huge improvement on Get Out. I would say, though, although I do want to probably see this one more time, this replay factor I think is much weaker than, say, Midsommar or even Hereditary. I don't like those films. The things I think those films are much weaker, but I would have to say Ari Aster has a replay factor that Jordan Peele lacks. So I'll probably see this one more time just for the spoiler review, but it did feel a little bit weak, even thinking it through when I was reflecting upon it. But I think for most of the audience, they'll enjoy the twist, they'll understand where he's going with it, and sympathize. But I do think he could have made better choices as a director and writer. Very highly recommended. But I think certain moments, I think for most people, will be like, I think he went a little bit too far for no reason.